Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
It's awards season at Below the Line, and like we do every year, I've got panels of film industry professionals discussing the nominees in their category of expertise. This is episode 5 of Plan 13, and today we're talking about the Oscar nominees for visual effects. Let me introduce my guests. Kent Secchi, your visual effects credits include The Matrix Revolutions, Superman Returns, and Iron Man. Welcome back to Below the Line.
Thanks for having me, Skid. Glad to be back.
Also returning is Chris Batty. Chris, your credits include A Wrinkle in Time, Creed 2, and Aquaman, and you've been a member of the Visual Effects Society, abbreviated as VES, which is the visual effects equivalent of SAG or the DGA. Nice to see you, kid.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
This is going to be fun. However, in the midst of these awards conversations, I think it's also important that we pause for a moment and acknowledge the LA wildfires and the terrible damage that's been inflicted on the film business. The consequences are truly devastating. To all of our industry colleagues, we see you. Now let's talk about some movies. The 5 2024 films nominated for visual effects are Alien Romulus, Better Man, Dune Part 2, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and Wicked. We're going to discuss them in that order, and spoilers are possible, so consider this a warning. Last note, I'm going to recognize the nominated teams by name, but apologies in advance if I mispronounce any of them. Kent and Chris, you guys are welcome to correct me. First up, Alien Romulus. The team is Eric Barba, Nelson Sepulveda-Fauser, Daniel McAaron, and Shane Mahan.
Well, Alien Romulus, the never-ending alien saga. In many ways, it sort of went off the tracks, as some people would say, for a while, and it sort of then really Scott got back involved. We had Prometheus and those sort of prequels, but this is the latest installment that sort of goes back sort of to the alien roots. And director Fede Alvarez really wanted to make a film that felt like an alien movie and paid homage, and almost paid homage to every alien movie in some way. One could argue maybe too much, but that's another debate. But we're here to talk about VFX. There are 1,400 VFX shots in this film. And in the way of sort of sending things back to the way things were in visual effects, sort of terminology, there's a lot of practical effects in this thing. And I think when you look at this year's nominees, all of them emphasized or went and talked about how the integration of on-set practical special effects with visual effects, or driving the visual effects, is part of sort of the common language between all of them. And Alien Romulus is no exception. They used every trick in the playbook to achieve their visual effects. You got to look at the fact that the face huggers, which are heavily featured, probably more so in this film than any other Alien film, like there were remote controlled face huggers, there were puppet face huggers, full CG ones, and they used every combination to try and integrate them into the film. And they are actually very well done. And I think that's one of the things about the film that's really interesting, is they made them, instead of just the beginning of sort of launching the alien cycle, they are heavily all throughout this film. And it's really interesting to watch how they were used in it. The xenomorph, the most famous alien maybe ever in movie history. There's a full combination of, there's an animatronic that's fully animatronic. There's a puppet version. And then they also have a suit worn by an actor, and then of course full CG for when they're fully articulated, and there's no way you could do any of the above. And then there's the offspring, I'll put that in quotes, which is the one that's horrifically born from one of the characters, and that is literally a guy in a suit, almost an homage to the fourth Alien film in some way. There's also the black goo, which was featured in the Prometheus movies and then also featured in this one. And even the character of Ash is recreated as Rook in this one. Sir Ian Holm, who has passed away before they made this movie, and his estate gave permission to use his likeness. Maybe it's somewhat controversial, the technique they used to create the android, because the android of Rook, who's Ash, is sort of destroyed, and the ship comes, the members of the ship find it, and they use a combination of puppetry with a sort of deep fake of the eyes and the mouth. So the puppet is most of it, but then they use the eyes and the mouth from the deep fake. being driven by another actor's performance to sort of go on top. But then when they released the DVD, they actually redid it, apparently sort of revealing their hand that they weren't quite happy with it. I think what they were trying to achieve on purpose an uncanny valley experience, which they successfully achieved the uncanny valley. But I don't know if it took people out of the film. I think it kind of did in some way, and that's why they wouldn't have changed it for the DVD if they didn't feel it was somewhat unsuccessful. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of great effects in this film, and the risk taking to like choose that approach for the Ian Holm character was certainly interesting and worth noting for sure. I think some of the space shots are the ones that are the most spectacular in the film. There's a moment in which the Romulus space station is literally falling into the rings of this planet, and it is mesmerizing. Like the effects and the particle simulations in that are just unbelievable. So, and they're really long shots also, so you really can take it in. And they shot the cargo ship that's the main ship of the protagonist as a practical ship. It's a miniature that's used, and so I think that helps ground a lot of those shots. And I think it's really well done. Chris, what did you think of that film?
So yeah, I mean, to be honest, like this film was not made for me. I love Alien, I love Aliens, I even love the Fincher one. And this felt too much like a pastiche, and that's going into like critiquing the story and movie itself, and that's kind of beyond the scope of this. So it did kind of, I kept getting pulled out of it, and things like the Ian Holm thing just kept pulling me out of it. It felt like they were trying so hard to pay homage to it. They forgot what they were doing right in front of them. And I've been on productions like that. I was on Superman Returns, and we kind of suffered from that too, where you feel so reverential to the material that has gone before you that you kind of forget to bring anything kind of groundbreaking and fresh. But I will agree with you. Can't like the space stuff, the ILM, all that stuff that they did it's fantastic. Like,
yeah.
It's stellar work. And I just got off a movie working with the ILM guys, and I think it's like impossible for them to make a bad shot at this point. Like they're so talented. And you're right, like all those shots of the station crashing into the rings are just like fantastic, and they're like super long. They just hold the shots, and there's like the computing power to get all those particulates and the light glints and all this stuff. I mean, I think Neil deGrasse Tyson might have some issues with the physics of the rings. It looks kind of like a solid record. You know what I mean?
Apparently, they were inspired by a BBC documentary to make.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they said that there's how Saturn got its rings was sort of the source of a lot of their information of how that was supposed to look, at least the rings themselves.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's like a solid service. Like it's like a needle on a record, which is not really how that goes. But I mean, it was still like, and that's the artistic choice. And so we just sort of delve into that. But it was really great. And there are a lot of shots too where, and you see the behind the scenes of like the face huggers, and they're just like these simple like rubber little things, and they throw them at them. And so the handoff between that and the CG ones are really well done, because you kind of get the physics of something flying and hitting you
100%.
Then they can kind of meld into like the thing kind of grappling at you and clawing you. And so I do applaud them for that, like trying to kind of go back a bit and use a lot of practicality and get a lot there. And for visual effects artists, that is great, because if you have something in the shot of like that reality and the way it kind of flies through the air or hits the water, or rather the light that in the scene that hits it, then you have an exact reference to kind of lean off of. And I think that makes everything so much more believable. And so,
I think that is a thing that has happened more and more frequently now in the last 5 years. And if you look back on the podcasts from before, like every year that we talk about these movies, increasingly every one of these films that we'll talk about today really takes pains to make sure something is real in that shot. And I think that not only helps the visual effects artist, but maybe even more importantly, helps the actor in the performance. And that's something that's sort of underrated in terms of visual effects films, is like, how hard is it to perform against nothing? I think that that's one place that like has in the past been discounted maybe 10 years ago when like there was a big move toward full CG green screen shooting, was how much the actor like feels the environment and it affects that person's performance. And I think that just helps ground everything. And what you're talking about, the reacting to the rubber thing hitting their face or like the water, you get all that for free. That is fantastic to get like all of that acting and all the physics and even what you're talking about, the reference for the lighting. Because oftentimes you're debating what makes something look real and if it looks fake, even though it should be very obvious to you or to everyone, because you're inherently making something that's not real, right? So you're guessing at something that what makes something look real or fake.
Yeah.
Is really in it. I thought the weapon design was pretty cool. That's more of a design thing, but yeah, the Kaylee Spano, the actor who plays the main actor, the protagonist, has this weapon that she wields that sort of automatically corrects itself. And there's a climactic moment in which the aliens are, obviously all descending on her. And she uses this gun to like basically shoot up all these aliens that are now hit with acid flying through the air. And then it goes 0G. And she has to then, float through the 0G environment. That scene to me was, from a design standpoint, really interesting as a visual effect because you have these splattering, acid in the sky, right? In the air, in this small contained hallway. And she has to fly through in 0G and avoid the acid while sort of going through. And she uses the gun as propulsion at one point to sort of get through there. I thought the design of that visual effect was pretty effective. For that, they had two hallways. They had a vertical one and a horizontal one, and they cut between them using various different rigs to like get her through that, which I thought was a great combination, again, of you're having a practical thing, which is this set, but then using different solutions to sort of drive getting there. But I thought that was a really, you're always in visual effects trying to find, and this is a story thing, but trying to find something new that people haven't seen before. And I thought that was a pretty cool way of doing that.
Going back to the Ian Holm thing, that wasn't all that successful, I think. Yeah, it was sort of a curious choice for me because I thought it was going to be a little bit more of an homage to like Alien 3, where they had the bishop left, the remnant.
Yeah.
And that one was like animatronic for sure. It was pretty successful for the time. And I think one of the things that's an interesting choice is that maybe perhaps if they had messed the face up even more.
Oh, interesting.
Kind of cover that up. Like, I don't know. I felt like they took a big swing and they probably just swung a little too hard for that, because it goes back to the whole from Rogue One with Peter Cushing and like trying to just do a full CG person, that's passed away.
There's this sort of conceit that it's an android. So I could buy, there is something very uncanny about it, right? And that at first I thought, well, this is what they're going for. They want you as an audience member to know that that's not a real person, that it's this sort of in-between state of like, because it's so destroyed. So I can see a case for that's intentional, and maybe for us in visual effects, we're like, oh, we're always trying to figure out how something's done. And maybe that took us out of it because we're looking at it and saying, oh, it looks like the eyes are real. The mouth's a little bit real. And then,
it felt like
I didn't, without doing the research, I didn't know exactly what was done which way. But I'm curious to watch it again, just the Ian Holm effect on DVD to see it. Apparently, even to make the puppet. So Ian Holm had passed away, so they couldn't sculpt him. They used the sculpt from Lord of the Rings. In Lord of the Rings, he played Bilbo Baggins, and they used his mold from that to sculpt the version of him in the film. And so they had to age it down to match the one from the first Alien film. And I think that's always challenging when someone's not really there to use that thing. So I have a lot of sympathy for how do you do this thing, and and how do you make it. I am curious to compare though the DVD version with the one that was in the film. It'd be hard to do because you have to find both.
You can find some compares online. It's definitely improved for sure. Some of it's the lighting and the contrast, and then it's like the projection of the mouth. I think they fixed.
Yeah. Right, because that's what they do. Is when you're doing the deep fake, it's finding all the photographs and all the images of Ian Holm, and then picking the best one that goes into that one particular setup, right? That one particular frame, and then blending them all together.
If you have a limited material, if you're only using like the first Alien, I mean?
It's hard. It's a super challenge.
It's a tough one. So.
Yeah.
Well, we don't make a point of handicapping these films. Do you think that they went and made those changes for the DVD? on some level might undercut it somewhat when voters are thinking, oh, if we're going to recognize it for visual effects, the fact that they weren't happy with their visual effects, we are judging the movie, not their final version of it.
I find it interesting that the filmmakers chose to go back and alter it. It's like a do-over you don't normally get, right? To go back into a film after it's complete, because generally that's the thought. Like it's a snapshot in time. Every film is a snapshot in time.
Unless you're George Lucas.
Or Coppola. Coppola's done it
Oh,
too. Yeah. So it does it. There's a question for me. Like, does it anywhere taint the film? And I don't know the answer to that question. I really don't. I don't know if that's controversial for anybody to say that. Like, I'm sure everyone would love to go back and correct something if they could. So if they were given the money, why, and the time to do it, maybe it's okay. Like I'm not quite sure. But I do think there's some spectacular effects in the film, and I saw it at the Grauman's Chinese Theater, and I just
Nice.
thought it was fantastic, like fantastic on a big
nice.
screen. Really, really amazing to watch all the way through.
Is the homage and nostalgia, is that a feature or a bug? And for me,
Yeah.
it was actually a feature, Chris. It was an interesting,
Oh,
but if
that's
it puts
cool.
you out of it, then I mean,
Yeah.
maybe you were giving the visual effects more attention.
I have to say it didn't take me out of the film when I was watching it. I was enjoying the experience of watching it, and even the Ian Holm stuff. I was curious how they did it, but only because I have a background in visual effects. Like I haven't heard like laymen talk about it in those terms, and like, "Ooh, what's going on there?" Like I was more like, oh, how do they do that? And then I did the research after just because I was curious.
I don't know. For that one, it just didn't hit me right. From the very beginning, everyone's point of view, right? It's just like how you're feeling.
I did like the grittiness of the film. I just felt that it had a grittiness that was something about it that was really appealing to me. And I think there was a lot of great design in that movie. That was pretty good.
Yo, yeah, 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 for sure.
Yeah.
All right, the next film on our list is Better Man. The visual effects team is Luke Miller, David Clayton, Keith Herft, and Peter Stubbs.
Better Man, I really enjoyed it, and it's I guess it's just a good year for musicals, right? You got Amelia Perez, you got Wicked, and Better Man here, which it was a really fun movie, and it's also interesting too. Is like here we are, like three Americans. Like Robbie Williams is such a huge phenomenon, and we're all kind of like who, and it's really weird to be on the outside of a phenomenon, like a pop cultural phenomenon, as an American. Like we're totally missing the boat. So this sort of taps right into that sort of fame and fortune of the rise of Robbie Williams. So obviously the key thing about this biopic is he's a chimp, he's a monkey, he's portrayed as a chimp. And so it's really interesting, like kind of going and watching his life, as a small baby chimp, and how he's kind of different and his aspirations to become a star, and all the issues with his father and stuff. And it's really well done. I found there was like an amazing just blend again with the practical and sort of the CG, because you have one fully CG character that lives inside this world, and the way it's shot and the lensing and all of that feels kind of indie to me.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Okay.
And it doesn't have a lot of slickness except for the choreography. And so I don't know, I just really like the look, and then how they got him to sit in the space, of each shot. And then you can kind of go through, like there's a magnificent little sequence in Regent Street, which is a big one-er shot where they did like 38 different stitches to put this shot together.
They're dancing around, they're changing clothes. Their
Yeah.
clothes are changing. I should say
Yeah.
they're not even changing clothes. They're just in different outfits. And
Yeah, they're just fully changed. Yeah, it's kind of like almost like a time lapse thing through one huge dance number. They're on Regent Street in London, but then they go inside stores and come back out. And it kind of goes through a period of his life with like costume changes. And, there's one scene where, one part where they kind of release all these gumballs on the street, and they're all kind of like clamoring and almost falling over, but it's part of the dance. And it's so well done. I thought that was really great. And then, and there's a lot of detail and nuance to his performance, in like the facial capture, and then a lot of great things with the costuming of him and all these grooms of hair, and his hairstyle changes throughout his life and how they kind of fit that
It's
into the
amazing.
chimp.
It's actually really amazing. Yeah.
It's really well done. And then the tattoos, like they go through and he gets all these different tattoos as his life goes on to match his real life, and how they kind of fit those into the fur and like shaved them down a little bit to kind of show that off. Yeah, and I guess they came up with this proprietary lens simulation kit, so to match all the lenses that they were using that kind of felt almost like vintagey, but they're like the lens distortion, the way the lens flares, and vignetting and all that kind of stuff, just to help kind of sit, if you got a fully CG character, and how do you make sure he sits within each frame.
Yeah, I think it's a testament to the visual effect that as you're watching it, this is the big test. Like, do you forget? Do you forget that it's an ape and you're like, okay, this is kind of weird? And I think you do. Like, that's what's amazing about this film to me is, and this is a great comparison to another one that we'll talk about later, The Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, same company, Weta Digital. Weta Digital did all of the Apes movies, and it's doing this movie. And so you say, maybe, at home, you're saying, well, what's the difference? And there actually is a fairly substantial difference in the performance of the ape. Like in this feature, he's fully articulating and singing and dancing and emoting on a human level. They purposely sculpted and surfaced the eyes and eyebrows to match Robbie Williams. And so when you look at his eyes, you're looking at Robbie Williams' eyes as an ape. So they're not ape. Like there's like an in-between of worlds in which he's not quite ape, he's definitely not human. And will you as an audience go on the journey? Will you think it's weird he dates a girl, he's has relations with a woman, a human woman, like from All Saints, Nicole Appleton? Does that gross you out? And it doesn't. Like it literally is not a factor. And I think that's a successful visual effect, right? Is you're watching this movie and you're not like beside yourself saying, this is ridiculous. Like, and maybe in the first bit you're trying to buy into it, because you want to watch this movie. But I think it's a testament to the fact that it does work in a weird way. And maybe because we don't know Robbie Williams as well, but I think even fans of Robbie Williams would be okay with it. And you're right. Like there's 50 different hairstyles, 226 different costume changes in this thing. Like every one of those hairstyles has to be groomed, literally groomed on that character. Every single one of the costume changes has to be simulated in a different way for the different material that falls on the character. And so that's the complexity in all of this sort of being authentic to Robbie Williams, is that you have to make choices on where to deviate from being an ape and where to be human. And those are all nuanced little choices that are hard to make, and another director who hasn't made a movie like this, a visual effects driven, Michael Gracie is the director of The Greatest Showman. There are some visual effects in that film, but not at the level of this is, and they had an actor play Robbie Williams as an ape, and he did a great job being Robbie Williams. I think they were really trying to differentiate themselves in the marketplace of rock biopics, right? They've had numerous rock biopics. I heard a story, I read the story online that the director went to Robbie Williams and said, "What animal is your spirit animal?" And Robbie Williams said, "Lion." And then the director said, "Well, what about a monkey?" And like sort of like, I don't know if that's true, but that's the story that I read online. And I think that's really funny, because I think it does work in the sense of like he's on display, he's like this sort of larger than life, very like animated character that it would be much harder as a lion to watch this.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And the metaphor, like he was just in a boy band, take that. Right. He's basically just a singing monkey for the first part.
Yeah. So, but that dance number you point out is amazing.
Yeah.
And that is the director. I think he knows how to direct a musical, how to choreograph a musical. And then you add in the CG of Robbie Williams as a monkey and being able to do some things that are extraordinary that humans can't do in the monkey state, right? And so like you're getting the best of both worlds with that, which I think is pretty phenomenal in that way. That it's John O'Davies is the performance actor who gets to play Robbie Williams. And I think one of the arguments that they had, or one of the arguments why they did it that way, is like Robbie Williams as a performer and as a celebrity is larger than life. He's, even if you don't know much about Robbie Williams, you get a sense that like he if you had to find an actor to play him, that would be a hard pull. You know, that's a hard person to cast. And by doing the monkey, you kind of get around it. You know, you sort of allow it to be something in it of itself. And I think that's a
And he could do
choice.
his own voice, right? Like he's
Right.
not playing himself, but he is in a way,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of amazing. There's that dance he does it when he first meets the love interest, the real life love interest. It's on a ship or a boat, and he does a dance on the deck of the ship, and that's all CG. Like there's a lot of CG in that, like sort of the environment around there. Like that was fully planned, but it's really well done. It's kind of remarkable. This monkey dancing with an actress, right? Like, and it's really well done. It's fantastic.
Oh, yeah, and the Nebworth Festival too,
Oh
the
yeah,
huge festival they had to kind of recreate his famous performance there, and they basically recreated the whole thing with a massive crowd sim
yeah.
and the crazy camera move and sort of it's like you're part of the performance. It's
Yeah.
yeah, really well done. Oh, the other thing, yeah, and I guess they spent a lot of time like doing blend shapes and capturing like these unique facial expressions of Robbie Williams because he's so distinct, right, in
Right.
interviews and everything, and so they wanted to make sure to capture that part, and it seems really successful to me.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that maybe sort of downplayed is the fact that they did it with this performance actor on set where he gets very intimate, very close in proximity to other characters. And so all of the normal performance capture things, which is you have a camera that's basically strapped to your head, sticking out. It's a small camera, like on like a microphone almost, sticking out in front of you. They couldn't do that because it would get in the way of the performance. So a lot of it was hand keyed as a result of that constraint, right? And even the famous dance number that we just talked about on Regent Street, they couldn't get all the witness cameras set up on the whole street. So they had to put stereo witness cameras on each side of the main camera to help get it to capture the performance. And so there were these innovations they had to do or sort of on the fly things they needed to do that made it even more challenging than a normal sort of motion capture setup in a live environment, which I thought, is another tip to the VFX artist and supervisor for making those adjustments.
Now, Kent, when you said earlier about the different outfits, would I not assume that John O'Davies, as you said, the performance actor, he's not wearing the clothes? I mean, the clothes have to be recreated as well,
Yeah.
or like
Yeah.
he couldn't wear the tuxedo and then that saves them some
No.
visual effects
No,
effort. I don't know
because what happens is the performance artist has to wear a special suit with markers on it, right, to capture the movement. And then even on top of that, it has to be retargeted to the proportions of the monkey, which are different from a human. So yes, you would normally think, oh, just have him wear a tuxedo and we'll just replace the face and the hands or the head and the hands. But the problem is like then it doesn't look like a monkey, right? So like you have this thing where you have to make him a monkey. You have to get the performance from like so you have the motion, the basic motion, then you retarget using different proportions onto a monkey frame, and then you put clothes onto that monkey frame and then simulate the clothing according to the movement. So
Yeah.
if it's leather, it's more stiff. If it's cloth, it flaps more. And so all of that stuff has to work for the body type of a monkey. So that's what makes it that much more challenging. And whenever you work on a film that has a CG character, there's always talk of how many costumes, how many quote variants do you have of that character? Because then we have to basically simulate multiple different types of simulations, and each one has to go through a QC process with different problems.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, like, in a normal movie, you might have like two or three, and this is like 200 and something.
Yeah.
It's insane. And so, because think of like Rocket Raccoon, like he's always wearing the same thing, right? It's just because they don't want to have to deal with like designing, simulating, grooming, all that kind of stuff.
Maybe Rocket just likes one outfit though.
Yeah, but I mean, it's comic book, and it's a signature look, right, that they've come up with. But just as one example.
Well, the third film on our list is Dune Part 2. The visual effects team is Paul Lambert, Stephen James, Reese Salcombe, and Gerd Nefzer.
So with Dune 2, I mean, the first Dune was amazing. The visual effects are amazing. So your question is, does the second one elevate the material enough to warrant another visual effects award? And I think the answer is yes. And there are several things that are standouts on this film. Like if you look at, for example, the scene in which Paul Atreides rides the sandworm is absolutely mind-blowing, and it really shows you something that was kind of seen in the first film, but then you really feel it from Paul's point of view. That effect, that's set up, that alone is an elevation. But beyond that, if you look at the world, the Harkonnen world on Gidi Prime, that is another example of something you didn't see in movie one.
Or any movie.
That is pretty cool. It is shot, we're talking shot with a infrared camera, and conceptually makes sense in the black sun world of the Harkonnens. It removes color rather than adding color like, like a regular normal sun. It is so stylistically interesting and cool and well done. Shot with an infrared camera, but then the visual effects have to blend in and match up. Fade Rautha's big fight in the arena, all the imagery in there, that world building. Like, so it took the first film, and just expanded upon it and created even more scope and scale. And also the crowd work in this film is at a whole other level than the first film. The crowd stuff that's used in this film, both even on the Harkonnen world, there's an immense amount of crowd work and scope, and even on Arrakis, the fights and when Muad'Dib is worshipped, those scenes have a scale that wasn't in the first film. And I think if you look at those things, the answer is yes, they are doing even more. They bring back the sand screen, which we talked about on movie one, to do all of that work, to like try to minimize the blue screen stuff and to get better spill on the reflections, and all of that is back in this one. But for sure, Denis has taken that first film and expanded upon it. And I think he could make the argument, and certainly, Paul Lambert can make the argument, that the same one that Lord of the Rings made, which each film brings another level of excellence in visual effects to the table.
Yeah, it's incredible. I was just like obsessed all weekend about learning about the infrared process. So, like, I went into just a spiral, and like as far as like trying to get online and ordering like infrared filters for my camera, and like I just like, it's kind of a fun and fascinating thing. And yeah, you're right. So now the visual effect, so you shoot everything in the infrared spectrum, and now the visual effects have to sort of emulate that optics. You're working under a totally different like optical realm, right? And so how do you fit that back into the live action play? It's, so that's a whole other thing you do.
Right.
Oh, and those fireworks was a cool design element too. They're like these almost look like underwater ink effects.
Yeah,
almost.
it was crazy, like ink blot effects. It was kind of a crazy firework. Yeah, that's in the Harkonnen world.
And it's just sort of like we're someplace different,
Yep.
and it was just a great choice. And the way infrared reacts to the human skin is really interesting, which is why they would do it. It's almost like if you look at like Prometheus and the way the engineers were, that sort of alien whiteness.
Yeah.
It's very similar language, except this is all just kind of done purely by the lens and filters. It's not like a makeup effect at all. It just it gives this like ghoulish otherworldliness to the skin, and it makes Fade look like a true psychopath killer, right? And it just sort of fits thematically. Like all these effects choices always kind of work within the story. And I was trying to like scrub through it this weekend again, because obviously I've seen it several times, and seeing it on IMAX is the preferred way to see it in the full aspect ratio. But I was trying to refresh my memory of everything, and it's hard to find like even an average shot in this. Like everything is so well integrated.
Yeah.
Like all these models of like the huge like crawler harvester things, they're just so complicated and so complex. They just look like real things,
Yeah, they are unbelievably real, and yet they're still unbelievable, like in a way that's like it really is fascinating. And this is like why when visual effects really work, you're like, but you buy it. you buy the whole thing, watching it. I saw this behind the scenes where they literally got like giant, like construction machines to cast the shadows when
Oh yeah,
Zendaya's running behind them to try to hide, while they're
the
trying to take
little
it down.
legs, the legs on
Yeah,
the
the little
car.
legs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd say little legs. They're tremendous legs, and they needed these huge cranes. And
Yeah.
they had those are the practical pieces. So they cast real shadows
Yeah.
on the actors in the sand and everything, so you'd have it there, but then you can extend it. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's like the design choices. That stuff is like the scale is kind of preposterous. But if you think of like if you ever seen those like European mining
Yeah.
crawlers and those mining wheels, they're also, it's like of that scale, but like, so it's sort of like something you can kind of believe, but it's science fiction, but it doesn't look absolutely ridiculous. Like it just all fits. And the sand screen thing, it seems like they kind of stepped that up even more.
Yep.
Where you, instead of shooting blue or green, it's like a tannish
Yep.
color, but they're able to still pull a key by like basically taking the original frame, inverting the color, and then you can still get like a clean key of a person against that. But you don't have any worries about green or blue spill that you
Yeah.
have
And
to
then
remove,
correcting for it. And then,
or if you have like crazy hair blowing in the wind, you don't have to worry about like trying to get all the little
Yep.
blue or green, which can freak people out. Like if you're a compositor, that's like could be a nightmare.
Yeah. I mean, despite how good the tools are, it's still hard.
Yeah, it's a lot of work either way. And so it just sort of, it kind of gives you just another way of working. And so and all the reflections and everything in the armor can still just be that tan.
Yep.
And it just looks like it's the open desert reflecting. You don't have to worry about replacing reflections and all that stuff.
I think it's a phenomenal achievement. Like when I saw the film in theaters, I was just blown away again.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're like, well, I saw Dune 1. So you think, oh, okay, so I know what I'm in for. And across the board, they really up the game. And that's great. Like you want your filmmakers to constantly not rest on their laurels and to like push the envelope. And I really feel like Denis and the filmmakers came back and said, okay, we're going to up it,
Yeah.
and they upped it in a way that matched the story, right? And I've heard Denis in interviews talk about how the environment shapes the characters. And that's so true in the way they're portrayed in this film. Like you really get a sense of like the black sun of the Harkonnen world shaping those characters, and then Arrakis shaping the Fremen. And it's really great to sort of have visual effects support that concept. And I think that is the true art of VFX, where it just feels like it's part of the work.
Well, I hope we're having another one of these conversations in another 3 or 4 years when if he actually goes and makes a Dune Messiah. I want to know where they'll go from there. But,
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the film as well.
Can't wait.
The next film on our list is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. The visual effects team is Eric Winquist, Stephen Unterfranz, Paul Story, and Rodney Burke.
So this one, yeah, this was a fun one. Like I kind of went into this a little trepidatious because we were like, the last one was kind of a nice fitting into the story. We got to say goodbye to Caesar, and then this one comes along. And it's like 150 years later. And then I was sort of a little cautious going, uh-oh, what are we going to do here? But it was actually a lot of fun. It was great. Get to know these new characters and sort of know this world that's starting to become a little bit more of like the original ones, which is like 3,000 years in the future with Charlton Heston. But this one's sort of starting to get to the true Planet of the Apes, right? So this one was really interesting too. It's another one of our sort of monkey movies.
Second monkey movie of this
yeah.
year.
So they might start giving a special Oscar for best monkey movie.
Or everybody starts putting monkeys in their movies. Like
Yeah,
whatever
every biopic,
which character is going to be a monkey?
now a monkey.
I think we need monkey characters.
We need more monkey characters.
The Brutalist was originally supposed to be a monkey. It's pretty interesting. So again, this is a lot of the motion capture, performance capture, right? The people in the suits, in sort of the facial capture. So all the actors are there, and then digitally replaced later with the actual ape characters. And like Kent says, it's the same company that did Better Men. And so a lot of the pioneering in this one is able to, and just like Better Man, you're able to do the performance capture out in the wild. So they did a lot of like real sets, real locations outside, and they were able to do the performance capture like on set there, which is super freeing. Because before, I don't know if people have seen like behind the scenes of like Avatar or what have you, and you're on a stage and it's very controlled environment. But here they've just built sets and stuff like out in the forest and able to using strategic place cameras, and they have all these stereo cameras they place on the actual film camera to able to kind of witness and get all the information they need from there. And so it's a lot more freeing for the actor. They're now in a real environment and able to kind of react to real things. And then another thing that I saw is they played a lot with trying to use real practical light sources, whether it's the fire or nighttime lighting, and then augment that with visual effects. Yeah, a lot of great things about this one. There's like the water sims. There's like a huge river scene. They set up a rapid river as a set piece on the bridge, and they have to kind of fight against that. And then there's like a huge flood at the end, that kind of takes over one of the environments. And so all that simulation and all that sort of interaction. So there's a lot of challenges and stuff. And yeah, I think really successful. So definitely a step up. I think they keep sort of advancing this.
Yeah.
All the performances were very believable, and a lot of nuance.
I think you're really seeing the culmination of lots of technologies coming to fruition here. Like we've talked about maybe when we talked about Avatar last year, how Weta is able to leverage technologies to make the Avatar movies into their other films. And this is a great example of that culmination of all these different technologies. And so Avatar often shot in very controlled environments, the Apes movies not. And by using some of that technology outside in the wild, they're advancing it even further. Their witness camera, their facial camera stuff is now tied into machine learning. So a first pass of performance based on what they're getting automatically allows the animator to really focus on performance and not just building the first pass. The first pass is almost automatically built for you based on machine learning. That's an advancement that takes place on this film that wasn't in previous ones. When you think about what the apes are doing, this has more talking apes than the first 3 ape movies combined. And so that alone is a big difference between, and so when you think about the Planet of the Apes movies, I'm sure there may be some people like, well, we've seen this before, but they're at another level. And this is why these movies continue to get nominated, is they're taking it and advancing the technology so that you can do things you couldn't do before. And what Chris touched upon about this, this dam or this flood situation with the dam, like that, they built in a parking lot, they built a controlled, flood so that they could shoot these motion capture people in the flood waters, along with the real woman actor, the live action woman actress who plays the one human, that's the hero human in it. And then they simulate the water so that they get the hair correct, like the hair is interacting with the water. And that's one of the more challenging things to do is hair is already a simulation. Then you have to do wet hair on top of that, and you change it from dry to wet. So that transition from dry to wet as it's happening is complex, and is another level of complexity in the visual effect that's hard to do. That's computationally intensive and has to look real. It should also be pointed out, this director Wes Ball did not direct any of the first 3 Planet of the Apes movies. In fact, he's famous for doing the Maze Runner movies. But what got him this film actually is a movie that never got made. So he was directing a fully animated film called The Mouse Guard, and it was leveraging Unreal as its sort of backbone technologies. DCPs is his primary digital content providing platform. And that movie was a 20th Century Fox movie, and it was going to be a fully animated film being prevised in real time using Unreal, and was going to be finally output in Unreal. And then Disney bought 20th Century Fox and killed the project. But based on what was going on there, the studio felt very confident in Wes's ability to direct a visual effects driven film, even though there were visual effects in Maze Runner, not at the level that of this film. And so that got him this one. And in fact, the first time he was offered it, he turned it down, but then came around to do this film. So there's all these sort of behind the scenes things that go into making a visual effects film from a studio perspective. Is like, do you believe the director can make that kind of movie? And his experience doing a film that got canceled allowed him to do this film, or allowed him to have the confidence of the studio to do this film. And I think that's a really interesting side story that most people wouldn't know. And I remember I was working on an animated film at the time, and I kept hearing about Mouse Guard. And every once in a while, you can do like YouTube search, you can find test footage from Mouse Guard that was done in Unreal. But it was like motion capture technology plus real-time rendering out of Unreal. And I think that Wes's experience on this allowed him afforded him this opportunity to work on the Apes movie, which I think is an interesting sort of side note and the fact that like there is more talking in this movie from the apes than ever before. And there's lots of this flood water simulation thing is a key part of the story in two parts, in the one scene with the dam and at the end in the climax with the flood there. So and you would think that at this point the Apes franchise would have won an Oscar by now, but they haven't. Every year that they've been up for an Oscar, something else has won. And so there is a real question, like, will the Apes ever fully be recognized? Like, there are famous franchises that have never won an Oscar, like the Harry Potter movies have never won an Oscar, and the Apes franchise has never won an Oscar, even though this features some really groundbreaking visual effects for each year.
They get nominated every time, but always a bridesmaid.
I mean, they might have split the ape vote on this one if
maybe
wet it for both of these movies, right? This and Better Man, like the people.
It is. It
might be tough. Split the people who are amazed by that might be going in two directions on this.
I mean, it's tough when you compare. Like, this is the interesting comparison of like the performance, right? A performance of the apes in this film are very much apes that can talk. So like they're apes, but they just happen to be able to emote and talk and relate to humans. Whereas in Better Man, the ape has human characteristics and it asks you as an audience to go along that journey with him and connect with him. And so it's a different solve. It really is a different solve. Like, and I think I saw some behind the scenes where on the Better Man, not to go back to that too much, where somebody from Weta was like, we usually just do fighting apes, but now we have to do dancing apes and singing apes, which is different than what we're used to doing.
Now, Ken, I wasn't familiar with that Mouse Guard, but I remember a comic book by that name.
It's based on that comic book.
It is mice, right? With little swords and so he was working with this furry human-like creature effect. Like that's what he was doing for that. So anthropomorphic animals. He was working on both sides for that.
Yeah, 100%. Like that was a direct translation of that comic book.
Yeah, this one, for Kingdom, again, they use that sort of putting little stereo cameras underneath the main camera, and each of those have like a wider field of view, and so you can kind of see what the cameras see from that perspective, but you get more of a witness of like what's happening. And they were able, and since it's stereo, you get depth, some depth information. And so if you have an actor and he's like picking a book up or something, and so you're able to kind of get a little bit better in that sort of closer interactivity with the practical prop, right? So it's like you have more information to play with when you're trying to get the CG ape to kind of manipulate that thing. And so they said that was very, very helpful with that kind of thing. And all these little innovations like that just makes everything more able to fine tune.
Last film on our list, Wicked. The visual effects team is Pablo Hellman, Jonathan Faulkner, David Shirk, and Paul Corbould.
So Wicked, based on the musical, but it's its own thing. And it's probably the most different from all of the other movies on the list, in the sense that its world building is a fantastical world building, right? It's not grounded in any kind of reality, even though Alien Romulus, you could argue, is in space. You're like, how can that be real? But there is this feeling of realism in those films, whereas this one completely goes into the fantastical. And so in some ways, it already differentiates itself from every other film here. Pablo Hellman's a very famous VFX supervisor. I think he's a 3-time nominee for VFX. He's a longtime ILM VFX supervisor. Very different film for him as well in terms of like this is also our second musical. I don't think in all the years I've done this with you, Skid, I don't think I've had two musicals. We've had two musicals in 1 year. So here's our second one. There's over 2,200 VFX shots because obviously the whole world is imaginary. But they took pains to create as much practical in the foreground as possible. Again, coming back to this idea of grounding the visual effects in something practical. They had a rule, I think, that was like in an interior, the first 25 feet would be practical, but beyond 25 feet, it could be a set extension. And for exteriors, it was like 50 feet was sort of the rule. There's this amazing scene in which the Munchkins are running through a field of tulips, and there's like 9 million practical tulips, and then beyond that, it's all CG. So they grew these tulips for that purpose. There is a practical giant wizard animatronic for his face. The mechanical face is actually real. Like they made a 1-ton animatronic face that could articulate for the wizard. They even made a 48-ton train that can go 50 miles per hour that was augmented with CG that Elphaba and Galinda get on to go see the wizard. But this one also features talking animals. So now, if we look at our list of movies, we have, I think, 3 films that feature talking animals. So there's thematically something interesting here. And if I'm not mistaken, that's not part of the original musical that's on Broadway, these talking animals. Like there's a whole animal rights thing that happens with talking animals in this film. And there is a different animals. So it's not just apes that talk. Now this one, we've got talking goats, we've got talking peacocks, and a whole band that plays. We have the flying monkeys that start off not flying, that transition and morph with, or maybe not morph, is so more accurately, they grow wings and they fly, which is a big sort of effect to have happen. The color in this film is very different. It's very garish and sort of bright. I guess garish sounds like a pejorative, but I guess very bright and colorful, as opposed to all the other films on our list, which are more muted in sort of their sort of take on color. And I think that creates all kinds of other issues, like even the color of Elphaba's skin. They did a lot of tests. They ended up going with a makeup-driven solution, but the interior of her mouth is actually augmented with CG or compositing to get the coloring right. And behind her ears and other areas that contact the costume, they left without makeup because they didn't want to mess up the costume. So this is a case where visual effects steps in and helps, right? Where they want to save some time and save effort by not, affecting another department. They use visual effects to help sort of augment. And that's the role of visual effects in a lot of ways, is to help find those and bridge those departments together and to create a faster workflow on set. And it should try and create easier decisions making on set to do it. And John Chu, another first time, not first time, but for a visual effects driven film, not known as a visual effects driven film director, and did a fantastic job making a visual effects driven film.
Yeah, it was super fun film. I don't know where you guys sit on the late 19th century debate on bimetallism with Wizard of Oz, but this seemed to not pick that up. Yeah, I was reading a lot this morning about the color, because my first instinct was like, oh, why didn't they try to emulate more of the sort of Technicolor look of the original Wizard of Oz, which is a very distinctive red, and the whole fact that, she has ruby slippers in the original Wizard of Oz is because of Technicolor red, right? Because in the story it's silver, and in this movie it's silver slippers.
I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah. And so, and that goes back to the whole bimetallism, the silver standard, the gold standard, Yellow Brick Road thing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with
I did not pick up on this one, the silver standard.
Supposedly the original Wizard of Oz is an allegory back to late 19th century debate on whether we should use the gold standard or the silver standard for the national standard for backing the dollar.
At the root of monetary policy.
yeah. And so the Tin Man is the industry worker. He has no heart. The farmers are kind of supposed to be mindless and brainless. And then the military lion in government has no spine or courage. And they all try to find their sort of humanity and brain,
Wow. The
And
subtext of
so
that of the original
taking
Wizard
the
of
silver
Oz.
slippers to the green emerald city of the greenbacks, and then finding the truth in the sort of progressive policies of the silver standard. Anyway, so that's that. But we kind of dropped that with the Wicked. It's more of a different political debate. But yeah, again with the color. So I was reading, and I guess John Chu was saying they had talked about doing the more technicolor look at first, but what he would want to do is actually bring in the vibrancy as the story comes through. So if you watch it, there is a lot of color, but a lot of it is quite muted at the beginning of the film. And as we get, and especially towards the Emerald City, it kind of gets more vibrant. And so that it kind of follows Elphaba's story, and as she has an effect on the world, the color kind of comes back out. And so I think we'll see a lot more sort of saturation in the second film. The other thing that was interesting about this is like all the actors really sang on set. They weren't sort of just lip syncing. And sort of what a tremendous sort of feat that is, especially with like Elphaba. There's a lot of like flying and wig work. She was like actually singing through all that stuff, which is an amazing thing. And it also brings to the point of like, especially if you're looking at Wicked and Betterman, is that these are complicated movies. Like this is just as hard as doing an action film, like an Avengers film. If you think about it, because a lot of people say, oh, it's musicals and they're just sort of dancing around singing and how fun. But like there is a lot of work, and this is a choreography, and it is just as complicated as any action movie.
It has to be super planned out. I would just to get the numbers choreographed, and then you include the visual effect of like flying, especially in gravity, that in the climax of the film, like it's pretty phenomenal. The visual effect itself is really well done. But on top of that, it's choreographed with the music and the singing. I did not know that they were singing actually on set, like that.
Yes.
So like
they were
they're on
she was
gimbals
belting
flying
out
around. Like that is,
and she was
that
hitting
is a
her
lot
marks
of work.
and flying in that rig, and she was like doing it. And obviously, I think they probably they have like a studio record they use for the final film, but she's there giving her performance, and just it's just the way you move and everything. You can tell if someone's lip syncing or not, and they're definitely singing. Yeah, and like her cape and everything had to be CG for the end. She's flying through because of the rig work and all that, and you don't want to, just the way it would interact with the wires and that sort of fork thing they sit in. And so it's pretty impressive, the whole thing.
There's a lot more involved with it than you may think in making these kinds of films. Like I think I was surprised. I was interested to see and read that they had actors for the animals, even the ones that were not human, like the quadrupeds. They always had an actor on set. So this goes back to this notion of like giving the human actors something to react to, one, and then two, even a reference for the performance, like that even like the monkeys that were not human proportions, not monkey proportions, and much larger than monkeys would actually be, were referenced and there on set. They even flew them around when they're obviously fully CG, so they get the physicality of it, and it gives the actors reacting an eye line to look at, and if you go back to like big green screen movies, there was a rash in maybe the mid 2000s of like, oh, we're gonna shoot the whole movie on green screen, and look at the eye lines, and they're not looking like so many times.
Really hard.
Actors, and it's not the actor's fault. Like let me stress this. The actors don't know because they have they don't know where the thing is. Them. They don't know where the thing is, so they're imagining. They're pretending.
The time, it's not even designed yet.
Right.
They might have like a little sketch of like, this is what you're looking at, and
so it's
people like
all the lessons, right?
Tennis ball. Right.
It's all the lessons from the movies, from movie making and visual effects coming to bear. I know Pablo Hellman really wanted to stress the performance of the animals and how emotive they are, even though they're literally just regular animals that talk. Like that's generally they're not like anthropomorphized that much. They still have their animal faces and they move like animal faces. And so they all present different, each animal presents a different issue in terms of how to show emotion. And I think one of the things he talked about was this notion of ambiguity, like in performance of a character not knowing or being unsure, right? And how do you convey that sense of unsureness across on camera, like ambiguity and ambivalence. Like that is a tough thing to convey. It was interesting to read the VFX supervisor talking about that as part of their job is finding ways to communicate the performance. And I think that is often overlooked in terms of movies with talking animals is the actual emotive performance and how do you get people to relate to an animal performing. And we have literally three movies nominated that have that as a key component of their film. Like the Dr. Dillerman, voiced by Peter Dinklage, who was not on set at the time that they shot it. They had a different actor, performance actor, be the goat, and could somehow crane and get into a position that would simulate the goat, and then replace with CG. And of course, Peter Dinklage's amazing voice, and then to generate a performance.
There's a lot of good work on these films. As we always do, though, I'll ask you guys if there's any additional films from 2024 that you want to recognize for achievement in visual effects.
A movie that I absolutely loved Civil War. And I think that movie was so overlooked at award season. I just cannot believe, if we talk about a movie that create world building, like it makes this idea that the country is in a civil war believable. And the way it builds it's a potboiler. So a lot of people didn't, or one of the criticisms of the film was, well, it was slow. Like it's a potboiler, and at the end, when it goes big. And I thought that the portrayal of the Western forces was super convincing, and the climax was great. And I think it was, and Alex Garland did the Ex Machina, which is another great movie that had visual effects that won the Oscar. That I think he knows how to shoot a movie that uses visual effects in a sparing way, but effectively. And I think Civil War is a movie that did a great job with VFX and integrated in the story so it doesn't take over the story.
For the VS, we actually nominated Twisters. It's a fun movie. It's not going to change your life. It knows exactly what it is. It's just a good time popcorn movie. But they did a lot of research and physics simulation on the actual storms themselves and how they behave. And how they generate, and then the whole science of what the character was trying to develop and how it dissipates. So there was a lot of impressive simulation, which is heavy computer work. And I think just for that, all those effects, it's a fun watch, an interesting watch. I guess the other one I'd want to sort of mention is Nosferatu, which I think is kind of more of a supporting actor visual effects
100%,
but they're really well integrated. Some of it is a little bit more impressionistic than others, but a lot of the work is just invisible because a lot of those sets were only built up to a certain level, like 20 feet or something, and so there's a lot of handover. So sometimes it's hard to tell what's visual effect and what's not, and so I think that was really well done, especially with the way they shot it with a lot of these blue filters, to kind of simulate the moonlight and all that kind of stuff, and having to kind of work within all that stuff. It was really interesting. And then use of natural light and all that. It's a really fun watch.
Yeah, it's a very stylish movie. So when you look at the VFX, it fits in the world that it creates. The world building is very unique to that. And Robert Eggers is, amazing. And so he's great at that stuff. And I think that's a good pull on that one. I think Twisters is a fun movie. It does a great job with it's an effects driven movie, right? So it does a good job of being what it is. And I think that's what you want in a movie like that.
Well, what we want for a podcast like this is you guys sharing these stories and looking at these films with what you know and sharing it with the rest of us. This was a lot of fun. On that note, we're going to call it a wrap. Great having you guys.
Oh, it was great being here again.
Yeah, thanks so much. Always a fun time.
That's 5 episodes in the can with 8 to go, and I hope you're enjoying the series. The plan is a new episode every 3 days until the ceremony on March 2nd, so subscribe now if you haven't already so you catch them all. As always, I appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info at our website, belowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z. Closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music and John Wan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. To all of our listeners, I appreciate you. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.